Welcome to the Cosmic Sponge. I'm your host, Jim.
And this is Steven.
Oh, yeah.
And this is...
You know what? I forgot the weird and wild world and stuff. So...
Oh, yeah.
Maybe,
well, it's okay. How about I do it this time?
What do you do it?
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge. Well, yes, folks, we are professionals. Welcome to Cosmic Sponge. This is the podcast where we talk about UFOs and other weird wonders of the world.
Alliteration
and
again.
I am Steven, one of the hosts.
And I'm Jim.
The other host.
The other host.
Before we get started, I would like to say we have literally just begun this podcast and we are already getting quite a few downloads and listens. So thank you to everyone that has found us so far. We're thrilled to see that. And again, write into the show and say hello. First contact at cosmicsponge.com. We'd love to hear from you. And also, please, if you like the show, rate it and leave a review because that helps other people find the show. Now, one of the reasons we would like for you to email the show is if you have some type of extraordinary encounter. If you have seen a UFO or you've had some other paranormal sighting, Bigfoot, winged humanoid, ghost, we'd love to hear about it. You don't have to use your real name. You can remain anonymous if you like. And the only thing we would like to have is some geographic information and what town you're from or city or country or what have you. And we would love to read it and share it with the rest of the group on the show. First thing, let's look at what we have found in the news this week.
This past week, I don't know when this episode would go out. I guess it'd go out in a couple weeks. So
we will be about a week behind.
Right. So one interesting thing was on October. What month are we in?
We're not that far back, man.
We're in March. We're in March. On March the 19th, on the Late Late Show with James Corbin, he had Obama on, our previous president, Obama. Reggie, the leader of their band, asked him a question about UFOs. And it was a really fun little back and forth. I think it was mainly, he was tongue-in-cheek initially, but then he got serious and he said, let me be serious for a minute. It is true that there are cases where we have seen footage and photographs of things that are difficult to explain and we don't know what they are. And they appear to be intelligently controlled. And I just thought that interesting that we now have a former president. Not that that's the first time, because Carter admitted to seeing a UFO. And Reagan famously made hints at otherworldly events.
I think when Ronald Reagan was governor of California, he had a UFO sighting. I think he was in a private jet and they saw some lights or something like that. But I don't think he talked about that publicly. If he did, it was maybe way after the fact, but I'm pretty sure he never really talked about UFOs or admitted anything about UFOs while he was in office. That is interesting what Obama had to say, I think today, or I'm not sure whenever I put in something about that on my news feed, and it says here that Biden apparently blew it off when he's been asked some questions about UFOs recently, and somebody said, well, what about Obama saying UFOs are real? And he said, you should ask him again. So I don't know what that's supposed to mean. But I do think it's interesting, and we've pointed this out on the show before, that we're seeing more and more UFO stories in the mainstream media now, and it is very interesting. Now, everyone's tiptoeing around it, being extremely careful about how they're wording it, how they're talking about it. But I was having lunch with a client a couple of days ago, and the restaurant had like Fox News or something on behind the bar, and it was some story about UFOs. I didn't really read it, but I just saw the headline or whatever, and I asked my customer, I said, what do you think about UFOs? And so now that it's in the mainstream media, I feel a lot more comfortable bringing this sort of subject up to just about anyone, which maybe before wouldn't have. I mean, I certainly wouldn't have just out of the blue asked someone about UFOs, at least during my day job.
Exactly.
But I asked him, I was like, well, there's another story on UFOs. What do you think about that? You think UFOs are real? And he said, probably not. But then he went on to say, but he does believe that it's most likely there is life beyond our solar system, probably intelligent life out there in the universe somewhere, which is likely.
Probably. I mean, there's a lot of stars out there, a lot of planets. We've
billions and billions.
Did he ever really say that?
He did.
He did?
On Cosmos? For sure.
Yeah. So,
billions.
I think I saw him on late night saying, I didn't actually say billions and billions.
He did say it, for sure.
Well, we've got video evidence.
If you think about it, the Milky Way galaxy has, they believe, about 400 billion stars. That's just our galaxy. And how many planets are attached to all those stars? Who knows? But some of the extrasolar planets that we've discovered lately indicates probably similar to what we have. 8, 9 planets, 6, 7 planets, something like that. So, I mean, we're looking at 800, 900, billions and billions of planets and potential life out there just in this galaxy. And in our universe, there's literally billions of galaxies. But they're very, very far away. And we're going to have that conversation one day on the show about the difficulties of space travel, but not tonight. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole tonight, but we're going to talk about some Einsteinian physics. And
without doing math.
You just can't underestimate the distance it is between stars.
You can, but you'd be wrong.
It's a long way.
It is.
To our nearest star.
You know, so that's the next thing I want to bring up is that Fox News program probably was pointing to this latest release of a video coming from the Navy. They were doing exercises again off the coast of San Diego in that region where they set aside for pre-deployment exercises. This time it was the USS Omaha, which I think is an aircraft carrier. You familiar with that one?
I don't know. Mm-mm.
Pretty sure it was the USS Omaha, and they saw a spherical object descend into the water. They had a sub in the area. My understanding is that they went to retrieve wreckage, and they were unable to find any. I don't have any other data from that. I know Jeremy Corbell was the one who released it. It looks like the video was taken inside of the command center on the Omaha, or maybe one of the attached cruisers. Probably not something they should be doing, but the Pentagon did say that the video was legitimate. So now we have another video that's come out, and it was shot at 11 o'clock p.m. at night. It showed 11 o'clock at night, appears to be transmedium. Now, that's Jeremy Corbell's word. I don't know that I would go that far. Assuming it did enter the water, there is no wreckage, and it just zipped off some other direction. It'd be interesting to see what the sonar data had to say. But certainly they have a lot of information available to us. It was since it was shot at night, they did use the infrared scopes in order to record this particular event.
So the USS Omaha is what's known as a littoral, Littoral, combat ship. And it is one of the new stealthy, it looks sort of like a stealth fighter on the water, a giant one.
That's cool.
Pretty cool looking, actually.
But it's not an aircraft carrier, right?
No, it's not an aircraft carrier. But pull it up and take a look at it. And it says it's an Independence-class littoral combat ship of the United States Navy. They laid on the keel in 2015. It's brand new.
It looks like a kind of ship Steven Seagal would be on.
Yeah, no kidding. Or the Terminator.
Yeah, Steven Seagal from the 80s, not Steven Seagal from yesterday.
Yeah, the much plumper Steven Seagal.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I've seen that video, and I want, be interesting to hear, some more information on that as it becomes available. I think we're just going to be seeing more and more of this kind of stuff. Really looking forward to next month whenever the declassified information forthcoming from the government. I mean, we'll see. I don't expect a ton, but I think there'll be something.
I hope so. I'm skeptical, but I'm always skeptical about everything.
Right. You know what that reminds me? There's something I put in my notes. It's actually at the top of my page of my notes for this episode. Last week, I was using the term skeptical or skeptic really when I meant to be saying debunker. Those terms to me are not interchangeable. Jimmy and I both are pretty skeptical when it comes to this subject matter, UFOs and so forth, because we want to try and get to the truth of it. I think, of course, we're open-minded and we want to try and get to the bottom of what's really going on with UFOs, but we know UFOs are real. A debunker is looking to say it absolutely can't happen because UFOs are not real. They will stretch the truth, and they will go after the people that made the claim, the witnesses, And that's what a debunker does. A skeptical person is just being skeptical. They're looking at all sides of it. And I think being skeptical is healthy. I think that's the way we should all look at this subject, because it is a pretty extraordinary subject. So just as Carl Sagan said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So, I mean, I really go along with that, but I think we have an overwhelming preponderance of evidence when it comes to UFO sightings. There's just too many of them, too many cases of similar things happening, and we've been seeing these things for 70 years now. There's definitely something to this subject, and it's good to see the government and the military is finally coming forward and saying it's true. Again, I'm going to try my best not to confuse those two terms moving forward. A debunker is somebody that, no matter what, they're not going to look at the facts or try to even have any kind of open mind. They're going to be closed-minded from the beginning. And skeptic is just someone that's like, I don't know, show me everything. Or could it be something else? And that's part of the reason why I wanted to start this podcast, because I like to listen to a lot of podcasts. As I was going through the lists available on iTunes, it seemed like almost all of the podcasts I would run across that had guests or whatever, I mean, they just automatically believe the wildest claims, in my opinion. I mean, it's fine to entertain some unusual ideas and some things like that, but to me, you know, there was none of the other, like, well, what else could it be? I mean, they'll just believe anything. I mean, you know, and that's not what I want to listen to, me personally. I mean, that's fine for other people if they want to just join the bandwagon and believe all the conspiracy theories and all the, no matter how outrageous, believe that. But for me, I like to look at things that we know are concrete with photographic evidence or very good eyewitness testimony, but then after that, try and look at other alternatives. That's the way I want to look at this subject.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm definitely on board with, there's a big difference between skeptic and debunker. And well, like you said, somebody who wants to look at things skeptically and not just assume that something is an alien, a little green man, or, you know, an abduction story.
You love saying little green man.
I do say, I think that, well, that's what it is. I think it is that as a skeptic, it's really hard for me. It's the extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And if you're going to see a light in the sky and immediately jump to some kind of intelligent control, that's not where I'm at. I'm really much into the show me the evidence that how did you get there? There's too much space between you see a light and then you're immediately to some kind of alien civilization. It's hard for me to make that leap without some points in between.
Right. And tell you the truth, unless it's just some really, really unusual sighting of like multiple lights and just really something unusual, very, very unusual. The nighttime sightings, you have to be so careful now because SpaceX and all these companies are putting so many things in orbit. There's so many experiments going on in orbit and things like that. There can be unusual stuff in the sky, and it's just normal. It's just what it is.
Yeah, there's a conventional explanation for it.
Exactly. So usually for me, I love the daytime sightings, especially if they're saucers or whatever, because I mean it's either a hoax or it's not.
Right. Well,
it's real. Right.
Talking about daytime sightings, the 60-minute interview this week recapped a lot of the stuff we already know about the Nimitz encounter, but it did add some additional information, just a bit, both on the side of, finally, the other pilot for the Nimitz encounter, Lieutenant Alex Dietrich. She came out and officially told her side of the story, which was very interesting, filled in the gaps a little bit. And also there was some additional information from the Senate in that Senator Rubio, on the record, said, basically we really need to look at this stuff, if for no other reason than for the security implications of it. I think Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo both echo that same sentiment. So it was really nice to see that in the mainstream media on something like 60 Minutes. It gives it a little bit more validity, and I'm on board with that. Skeptical as I am, I think it's a really good idea to research these things because at the very least, it's going to allow us to identify some things that happen in our atmosphere that are either going to end up being some kind of weapons platform or counterintelligence platforms by foreign agencies, or it's going to be some kind of natural phenomenon that we're not aware of that will help the sciences. That's at the low end. At the high end, maybe it is some kind of visitation from other alien civilizations. Can't rule it out. I think it's less likely, but certainly possible. And the Nimitz counter, more than any others, leans heavily towards that idea that it is some kind of advanced civilization that's visiting us, assuming that all the data, as I understand, it's accurate.
Right. But I'll say for my part, I mean, I think it's great. Again, we're seeing a lot of these stories in the mainstream media. It's fantastic. I mean, so many people that's believed in UFOs, interested in UFOs, have had to pretend that they're not for so long. And of course, when you read a lot of stories, they still kind of make fun of it, but they know they need to report the news, but then they still got to throw a couple of little funny quips in there because, you know, of the subject matter. And that's strange. You know, you could be talking about nearly anything else, even odd and weird ideas. You could talk about nearly anything besides UFOs, that everybody has to be really super careful. Right? They don't want anybody to think you're a saucer nut or whatever. But I will say, I watched the, after you told me you watched it, I streamed it and watched the 60 Minutes interview. I got to say, in a way, some of the mainstream news stories, it's great what they're doing. And they did bring the new, you know, the pilot forward, the other pilot, she decided to become identified, which adds validity to the sighting. But I've been a little disappointed, especially with, say, 60 Minutes, whenever there's plenty of civilian scientists, not most, but there are plenty out there that they could reach out to and talk about this phenomenon with. It's almost as if we're starting all over. I feel like it's 1947 again. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, we have to totally forget the whole history of UFOs the past 70 years. It's like suddenly UFOs appeared in 2004 with the Nimitz encounter. Nobody's talking about anything that happened before then at all. Nobody's talking to any civilian scientists or any UFO groups that study this in a very sober way and a very thorough manner to discuss this with. I mean, I'm not asking for a conspiracy guy or, you know, some crazy speculation about it, but I think it would be nice for some of those people that have stuck by it and tried to study this subject to see them get a little bit of recognition for the work that they've done. And certainly the government has used MUFON's data to get the funding. It helped them get the funding for ATIP anyway in 2007, according to MUFON. I don't know that for a fact, but I've heard a couple of people interviewed that said that they used some of their data. Mm-hmm. So I guess for me, I would like to see a little more acknowledgement of the fact that this phenomenon's been going on for a very long time. It didn't just start happening with the Navy and their UAVs. Well, we better get moving because I think we've already been on this thing almost a half an hour and we've not even reached our follow-up stage yet.
Much less the main topic.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. I have so much stuff. I can't wait to do this thing every week. It's like I run across all kinds of things or think of something and I'm just like, oh yeah, I'll make notes on it. Jimmy and I do have a little bit of follow-up here and there on the Zamora case. And what did you have?
So, yeah.
And again, last week we talked about Lonnie Zamora. Mm-hmm. It was where the egg-shaped flying saucer landed in Socorro, New Mexico. One police officer saw it, Lonnie Zamora, and then it took off with a blast of flame and left behind some trace evidence, some burnt brush and some landing pads and things like that. And it grew national attention. And everybody come and checked it out. So and we covered that case last week, but we both have a little bit of follow-up.
Right. So I still believe that it was a balloon. However, I would be remiss not to admit several facts, which make it difficult to say that it was indeed a balloon. So after a little bit of discussion with Steve and a little bit more research, I found a great website that detailed specifically the path that the object took and the wind patterns of the day, both as articulated by Lonnie, and I found this really great site that went back to look at the historical data, which indicated that the object was going against the wind and was traveling. Now, the estimate is about 125 miles per hour. Now, that's a conservative estimate, and it's based entirely on the amount of time that Lonnie witnessed the object moving away from him to where it moved out of view, and then calculating the distance from Lonnie to the point that it left view and the amount of time that had passed. So it's a rough calculation, but essentially it was going about 125 miles or so against the wind, which I don't know about anybody out there. I'm not aware of any balloon that can move against the wind at 125 miles per hour. So I think that's really the one thing I found that made me go, well, okay, there is something there that you have to explain if you're going to go with the balloon theory. So that's what I have on the Lonnie Zamora case. And I'm going to go ahead and post that website that details the historical data on the wind on our website so you guys can check it out yourself.
So you're still thinking it's a hoax?
I still think it's a hoax just because my natural inclination, to be completely honest, is that, again, extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary claims. And there's still the case that you have basically two humanoid figures. I'm a big fan of the idea that if there are aliens out there, I don't see any reason why you would think they would be humanoid. It could be any shape or size. You can speculate either way, right? You can make a strong case that it could be humanoid. Maybe that's the natural case that natural selection moves spacefaring beings toward a humanoid shape. That's a good argument, I suppose, but I tend to think that's stretching a little bit, and that's just me. I could be completely wrong on that front, but two people dressed in white coveralls, and even Lonnie himself said when he called over the CB that it was a balloon that he saw. He described it as, "Do you see a balloon in the sky?" Something like that was what he called back to the dispatcher. So yeah, I still think it's a balloon. And then all the evidence from, all of the communications with the folks over at the New Mexico Tech seems to indicate maybe it was a hoax perpetuated as a balloon. But it is really difficult, though, to explain how does a balloon go 120 plus miles against the wind. That's hard to explain. You really have to account for that. So if you're going to go with the balloon evidence, or the balloon theory rather, you have to come up with evidence that takes that into account. Now, I don't know how you do that. So maybe, I'll leave the possibility open.
That's fine. We can't debate this thing again because we did it all last week.
Yeah.
I'm taking everything at face value. Why they were two humanoids, I have no idea. Or human beings. If it is an extraordinary craft or something, maybe it's a time traveler. I don't know. I don't think a weather balloon would be able to travel against the wind, especially at the speed they talked about.
Well, let's be clear. A balloon cannot travel against the wind, folks.
Right. And the whole idea that it's a hoax, okay, I get it. But just because somebody called the dean, he's just a non-believer and assumes that it was some of his students that went down there and created this hoax. And not to mention, this vehicle had been seen in several other places and had landed at a farm and things like that. So I think it's real easy to debunk it and just say it was this or that. But I have some information, and what I wanted to go over and just to follow up on. Last week, Jimmy had pointed out to me that an individual named Rob Mercer had come across some old Blue Book documents at a yard sale. And I forget the name of the individual that lived in the house before that was a member of Project Blue Book. But Rob Mercer actually looked him up, and this individual ended up having a treasure trove of Blue Book, Project Blue Book, the Air Force's Project Blue Book, where they investigated UFOs. He had a ton of files that were just going to get thrown away, and he kept them as souvenirs, and he gave them to Rob Mercer. And so Rob Mercer now has these. They're being hosted on the Black Vault, which is John Greenwald's website that I talk about quite a bit. It's the one where you can find a ton of declassified documents, millions of declassified documents, millions of pages. John Greenwald has spent quite a few years filing Freedom of Information requests to get all of that. But anyway, I had went through some of the files and read the one on the Zamora case, and it's quite a bit. It's about 217 pages. There is quite a bit here, but I found the FBI file, which really doesn't have a lot. It basically goes into the account of seeing the object. He, talked about how solid the witness was, Lonnie Zamora. The FBI file has some drawings and some things like that of what they found. But Lonnie apparently wasn't the most outgoing individual. It was hard to get some information out of him. But anyway, the FBI file is nothing more than a description of the encounter, which we've already went over, and just says, we will update the Home Office whenever we find out more. And that's all we had. But what I found was interesting was a couple things in J. Allen Hynek's report. And one thing that they, and in fact, Moody, I think it was a Captain Moody, I had his report put up as well. They all believed this was a real object. Now, every one of these investigators that filed their reports with Project Blue Book said this was a real event. This definitely happened. But what they all assumed it was some type of experimental lunar lander, because, of course, NASA and all the subcontractors were working lunar modules and landers and things like that because of the upcoming moonshot that was going to happen in 69. And so they knew these devices had been experimented with, and they were assuming or hoping that something came from White Sands. They checked all of the helicopters that were at White Sands. All of them could be accounted for, so it wasn't that. And it's so funny, they had to go all the letters where they, wrote to Hughes Aircraft Company and wrote to all these different subcontractors, and they all got the runaway around saying, oh, you need to contact Lockheed. We can't say anything. It's classified. It's classified. Now, this is these companies telling the Air Force that we have to have special permission from X to give you this info. But it all came down to they were all desperate to find out what device it was. Now, none of them believed it was a flying saucer or alien spacecraft or anything like that. They all believed, based on the evidence there, that it was some type of lander. So this is something that Hynek wrote in his recommendations. He says, the object which produced this, if it is a new device under test or in maneuvers, be brought to the same location and movies be taken of it departing in the manner described by Zamora and under the same lighting conditions. This then could be played at any future hearings on flying saucers. Apparently all the civilian groups wanted a congressional hearing. Now, this was before the congressional hearing that we talked about a couple episodes ago. This, it seems to me, could go a long way exploding the myth of flying saucers and might do more good than all of the previous years of propaganda. And there was another place where Moody was talking about, we need to find this device, whatever it is, very quickly, because people are not going to accept us just saying it's an experimental device unless we can show it to them or at least show legitimate flight logs. And the only reason they're doing that, again, it goes to exactly what we talked about and uncovered in our declassified episodes, History of UFOs. It just goes to show you they're trying to tamp down the UFO phenomenon. They don't want a congressional hearing. They don't want this stuff brought to light. They want to find what this was so they can say, see, it was an experimental lunar lander. But just for the record, they never, ever did find anything that could account for this. And not one time, Jimmy, did any of these experts that were on the scene think it was a freaking weather balloon.
Okay, so
just so you know.
All I want
so if you want to look at some debunker website that's just trying to pull some UFOs can't exist kind of thing, and it had to be a weather balloon that went against the wind and somehow shot flames down on the ground and burned the brush and everything else that went along with this, yeah, that's fine. It's your choice.
I'm just saying, what I want to say here is that if it was some New Mexico students from the 1960s who pulled this off, kudos to you, brothers, because it's an extraordinary hoax. Extraordinary.
Man, I just don't think it's that. No one has ever come forward. There's never been the first shred of evidence to point toward that. The only thing they say is like, they'll say, yeah, they got white coveralls at the university. Big whoop, man. Lots of people's got white coveralls. Maybe space aliens have white coveralls.
No,
man.
They wouldn't use white. Come on.
Well, I mean, you have to admit there's just not any, there's zero evidence other than, okay, these students will hoax things sometimes. The experts that were on the scene, the Air Force, all the declassified information that we have show they don't think it's something simple. They think it was a pretty extraordinary event that happened here. They believe that it was some type of experimental lander that our government was working on, and they're desperate. I mean, you can see all the letters of them reaching out to various contractors, various aircraft companies, and all of these other military installations trying to find out if they had something in the area. Because, again, they realized this was a pretty extraordinary sighting.
Yeah, I think this just shows my inner Scully. I need to have more evidence than what we have.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fine, dude. I mean, your prerogative. I mean, I wasn't there. I didn't see any of this. I'm just going off all the testimony and that type of evidence and what the people filed their reports and said at the time. I found something real interesting also in this file. There's a ton of newspaper clippings about that sighting, and one was, and Hynek himself said, let's not worry about this case for now. But I actually found this to be pretty compelling, that there was a girl who saw an object that looked very similar to the one that was described that Lonnie Zamora saw in a town, and this is a really, really bad copy. Can't read everything.
Is this from the Project Blue Book files?
There was a 10-year-old girl that whenever she looked up and saw a strange egg-shaped thing in the sky yesterday afternoon, a report from a truck driver and his wife that those two saw the mysterious object in the sky between here and Socorro, and I'm not sure where. Albuquerque. Okay, this is in Albuquerque. The little girl ended up suffering eye, nose, and face burns when she looked up at the object, I guess, flying over.
So you're saying... So you're saying that if you look up at a spacefaring object, you're going to get your face blasted off?
No, but I think it's interesting.
Well,
They said that she said she was not facing the sun while watching the thing slightly smaller than an airplane, having no windows, speed across the sky and disappear in the distance. Her mother said the child has never had a sunburn. But then her sister, 8 years old, was there too, but she didn't look at it the same way, like focus her attention on it very long, and she's okay.
I don't know
But
what
you
to
know,
make out of that, but I mean, I wouldn't put too much.
I mean, this is, dude, her face is burning stuff. She was in the hospital, and her eyes.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe. Well, okay. I don't know what to make of it, to be honest with you. I'm not inclined to jump to conclusions and say little green man shot her face off with some kind of X-ray beam. I'm just saying.
There's another case. It made me think of one. Have you ever? Do you know the damage that your eyes can get whenever you look at a welding torch, like an electric arc welder?
Oh, all too well.
Like, you can look at it, but honestly, you can look at it just like a UV bulb, like these bulbs that you use in your heating and cooling system. Never ever look at one
Right.
while they're on. It's same as whenever you're welding, because you can look at it and think, okay, that's not so bright, or okay, it looks kind of cool. Then that night your eyes will get blisters on them.
Yep.
And the UV will burn your eyes. That's actually happened in some UFO cases. I heard an interview with a woman that said when she went to the doctor accused her of looking at someone welding without goggles. That her eyes, she was blinded for a couple days.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I have nothing to add to that. I have nothing to add.
You know what? About the time I think that you're going to come around to some logic, there you go.
It's not logic. It's like I have to have more information. It's like hearing a story isn't enough for me. I have to have details. I have to have information. From point A to point B, I have to have a lot of information. It's sort of like building a bridge across a chasm of faith. The bridge has to go pretty far across the chasm before I'm ready to take a leap to the other side. And I just need more than most people. And that's either a failing of mine, or maybe it's a benefit or a positive. I don't know. But just me personally, I need to build the bridge pretty far across the chasm of faith.
Okay. I mean, that's just like anyone listening to this podcast, that's your prerogative. But I know there's been a few times we've been talking about some cases like that Fort Monmouth. You were like, oh, wow, the radar data and these planes chasing them. And it's like, yeah, it's all kinds of witnesses. There's something there.
Yeah, like the more data that's available, like hard data, if you have radar data, electronic data, visual data, the more data from different sources that you have, particularly if some of the sources relies on direct human visual or auditory senses, if it has more of a mechanical additional
But there's a human being looking at the radar dish that's reporting that.
That's true.
At the radar screen, rather.
Absolutely true. But, I mean, you have to, that's different, right? You have to agree that if you have some kind of mechanical device supporting a human's observation, that's better than just having a human observe something, I would argue.
Right. Okay, here's my last piece, and then let's just wrap up this Zamora thing, and Jimmy can...
Poo-poo on the next thing.
Yeah. Do you remember who Dr. Donald Menzel is?
That sounds familiar.
From Harvard College Observatory?
No, it's...
Menzel.
I know the name Menzel, but yes, keep going.
Donald Menzel was the first big debunker to come along.
Yeah. Yep, I got you.
With he's the first one to come out as a debunker of the whole UFO phenomenon. So anything that came up, he would always find logical explanations. Well, I found a letter that was in this file that J. Allen Hynek, and it at the time was a skeptic himself. We know that. And again, after he examined this particular case, from what we understand and what others have said, is one of the cases that started moving him toward thinking something is really going on here. It's not just all hogwash. But anyway, he wrote this letter to Don Menzel and Lil Boyd, Mrs. Lil Boyd. And he said, Dear Don and Lyle, at long last, I'm prepared to make a reply to your letter on February 19th. So no doubt they were asking him about it so that they could debunk it, no doubt. So he talked about where there was no cardboard or anything around, so it wasn't a fake model of the spaceship. He discussed it with the Air Force, and they were in agreement of what followed. Well, he goes through the burning brush and all that. He's talking about how hard greasewood is notorious. He says in the letter, greasewood is notoriously hard to ignite, and a match or ordinary flame held to it would hardly affect it. And the fact that it burned Chavez, the other police officer that showed up right after Lonnie, said that the burns appeared to be as though intense but localized, and it had seared the grass and bushes around it as well. The hoax hypothesis is, of course, one that suggests itself immediately, but it's in my opinion that of both Chavez and FBI agent Barnes, that Lonnie would have had to have been in on the hoax if we adopt the hoax hypothesis. They testified that there were no tracks in the immediate neighborhood, and so that the hoaxers must themselves have arrived or left by balloon. Had it been a hoax, certainly some paraphernalia should have been left around if the pranksters beat a hasty retreat. These gentlemen said that nothing of the sort was found. The wind was blowing strongly from the south, yet the object reported to have gone directly west. This would hardly fit a balloon unless, of course, the directions are wrong. But then, Jimmy, you said you backed that up.
Well, I said I found someone who had gone through the historical data which backs up that scenario where the balloon would have necessarily be going against the wind, which is, I think it's unarguably an impossibility.
He does add that pranksters could have hidden behind the knoll directly to the south, particularly if they had lain prone. Opal Grinder does have a high school student working for him, and I talked with him at length. Teenagers generally hate Zamora's guts, but it was added that they all hate all the fuzz, and that and he put fuzz in quote marks, and if they wanted to get even with Zamora, they would simply beat him up or do something more direct, letting the air out of his tires or something with immediate results rather than resort to an involved hoax.
The fuzz. Yes, we're going to go and we're going to attack the fuzz. I guess it was 64.
And then it says Opal Grinder, of course, would have to be in on the hoax too. He again told me the story of the tourist who said he had sighted a strange object crossing directly in front of him. I'm sorry, Opal Grinder was the owner of the gas station. But they put some effort into finding those two tourists too. They looked really hard. They knew this was going to be a big case because APRO and NICAP both showed up very soon and were taking soil samples, all kinds of photographs. They knew this was going to be a tough one to tamper down.
Yeah, I don't know. Was Opal?
Just as I'm scanning this again, man. It's just would be a difficult hoax to pull off, because you want to get Zamora, and then it's like you got to just guess he's going to go up that road. I mean, why would he even go up the road? He had to turn off and go up that road and abandon his car chase. The idea that another car baited him and everything, it's just too much. There's just, I mean, unless if it was a hoax, they were just waiting for someone to come along. I just don't think,
or if they were just practicing for the hoax, that could be it. And that the chasing,
they were able to get away and not leave anything laying around either that quickly.
I agree.
And get away from 2 police officers on the scene immediately afterwards? I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree with you that if it is a hoax, it is an extraordinary hoax and required one of 2 things. Either a misunderstanding of the situation by Lonnie Zamora, like he misinterpreted the things that he was taking in through his perceptions.
Well, look at this.
That's possible.
He just says this again. He says the things that would seem ultimate against a hoax are the fact that no tracks coming to or going from the region were found minutes after the sighting occurred. Paraphernalia was not located again within minutes. Chavez and the FBI agent would have had to have been in on the hoax. And finally, the object took off crosswind. Paraphernalia I referred to would have been ropes, launching equipment, gas tanks, etc., which would have been difficult to dispense of in a few minutes, and certainly without making any tracks. You say the whole thing, and this is him talking to Menzel, I guess. You say the whole thing could have easily been planned to come off as it did. I think otherwise. It would have been quite difficult to have a thing like this come off, even as to the original timing. Zamora did not have a regular patrol route, so all of his approximate whereabouts would not have been known or given time. I questioned Chavez on this, and Zamora patrols the whole town in an unscheduled fashion. By the way, there is no local UFO club. The fake UFO would have had to have been rather sizable, since it looked to Zamora like an overturned car upended, first off, from a considerable distance. You suggest that when Zamora's car crested the hill, the hoaxers triggered another blast of flames and released the UFO and ran like hell. The terrain is such that when a car crests the hill, it suddenly comes upon this site. There simply would not have been time to wait until this happened to release the UFO and them hide. Not unless there were elaborate ropes and wires running over some distance on the ground. As long as Zamora wears his glasses, his eyesight is good. He must remember that he did not lose his glasses until after he saw the flame and thought the object was about to explode.
This is the conclusions of who?
J. Allen Hynek.
Yeah.
He was a skeptic at the time.
Yeah.
And he does talk about the kids in the town and everybody picking on him and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, again, he just says the fact there's no tracks, there's nothing left behind, nothing. And there's no tracks leaving the site. I mean, the Chavez was there, Zamora was there, Chavez came within seconds, minutes after this thing disappeared. He was there, and then the FBI agent Burns showed up pretty soon too, and saw no tracks leaving. So I don't know, man. I think the more we look at this, something actually took off, and that is why when he gets down to it and he goes on into this thing, he says that, and he talks a little bit about some other things, but he gets on down to it. He just says that the big thing he sent to Dr. Menzel, and there's a lot of other stuff here, was the fact that it just could not have been a hoax, that he just sees no way whatsoever. Now, this is a skeptic looking at the scene. He's like, I just don't see how this could be a hoax. They all wanted to find out. They just believed something landed and took off. The FBI report says that. The Air Force report says that. All of these official reports say something definitely real took off here. We need to find that vehicle. We need to find which agency, which government entity is responsible for this. And guess what? They never did. And they worked very hard to find it. I've got a ton of letters here that they wrote, notes about phone calls they made and all kinds of stuff. So anyway, when he was talking about looking at the site, and I thought this was really funny, at the end of the letter he says, P.S. I now have a slightly infected finger from the thorns on the bush that was originally charred. The bush drew blood when I attempted to get some soil samples. Undoubtedly, the finger will now wither away from radiation burns. Unfortunately, I do not have interplanetary Blue Cross coverage.
So he had a sense of humor. Love it.
That's hilarious. And that's from Hynek.
Yeah, love it.
That's
love
pretty funny. Yeah, anyway, that's the main thing I actually wanted to share, that apparently Hynek did have a sense of humor. So, I don't know, man. I know we've spent probably way too much time on this. So let's just move on. You can, that's fine, dude. I know, in this particular case, there's really just one primary witness, but it's a pretty extraordinary case, and I find it to be fascinating, and I know that it's a big one.
Okay.
So anyway, listeners, if you want to listen to the first part of this, it's the Lonnie Zamora case. That'd be episode 5, and this was our follow-up to it.
Right. Before we move on, though, I do want to address one thing here. I maybe address, but maybe ask you a question, because I'm going to go on the record. I'm 50-50 split on this one. 50% that there is some kind of terrestrial normal explanation for this particular case, and the other 50% is open to the idea that this is an extraordinary event that points towards extraterrestrials. I'm split 50-50. Where do you fall? Come on.
I think something happened there, but I'm not going to say extraterrestrial because we don't know that. There's no evidence to say that it was extraterrestrial, but it was some type of extraordinary vehicle. I don't think that it was anything from our government, because I think Blue Book would have uncovered that, and it would have been in those reports.
So you're saying extraterrestrial?
I'm not saying extraterrestrial. It could be terrestrial, but...
So I'm more of the believer than you are, because I'm saying 50% terrestrial, kind of explainable thing, conventional knowledge that we have, versus 50% that I think it's an otherworldly event. So I'm more of the believer than you are in this particular case, you would say.
Well, no, you misunderstand. I don't know what UFOs are or where they come from. I don't know that they come from space. I mean, if they are something odd, I mean, they could be, as I've stated before, they could be time travelers. They could explain the whole humanoid thing, why they look like humanoids. They could be somehow interdimensional.
Oh, so that 50% of the group, I consider all that to be an extraordinary event. So something beyond conventional.
I said it was an extraordinary event.
So where would you put percentage-wise? Like 100%?
I would say I only give it, and I hate that. I don't know why you always want me to say percentages.
I want to know. I want to try to get a sense for where you are, because I still don't know.
I would say only 10 to 15% that it was a hoax, but I don't think it was a misidentification of anything terrestrial. I mean, if it was a hoax, and just like J. Allen Hynek, who was on the scene, talked to all the witnesses, it would have had to been an unbelievable hoax. I think it's too easy to say hoax, because there's a couple things that point toward that he was unpopular with the young people, that he used to work at the college, and that the New Mexico kids, did these elaborate hoaxes, and I get all that. I don't see how they could have targeted Zamora. It was in an unusual area. If they were just practicing, why practice there? And if they were just practicing, then they wouldn't have gotten away as easily and without leaving some kind of evidence.
I agree with that. I mean, if it is the case that they found absolutely no evidence of anybody being in the area or
and with no tracks, no vehicle, I mean, I'd say they were pretty darn thorough, because none of these people wanted to believe in UFOs.
I don't know. Maybe they just
wanted to find. Trust me, they wanted to find those tracks. They wanted to find car tracks. I bet they went way out of their way to look for them. So. Just saying, none of these people wanted it to be an unknown case, which is the way Blue Book ended up leaving it.
Fair.
They wanted to find things so that they could say, look, hoax.
Fair enough. We probably should move on to our next topic, which is something we can argue about at the same level as the Zamora case.
I hope listeners enjoyed that, our take on the Lonnie Zamora case. I mean, for sure, look into it yourself and email the show. Let us know what you think at firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Or you can go to your feed and you can find our webpage from there, and the contact information's on there as well. So let's move on. Today's topic... What we are going to be covering today is the Travis Walton incident that took place in 1975, November 5th. This is a very famous case. I'm sure if you know anything about UFOs, you have heard of this and probably seen Mr. Walton interviewed and had plenty of people talk about it. Jimmy, why don't you give us a rundown of what happened?
It all began on November 5th, 1975. A group of 7 loggers were working a area of the Apache Sitgraves National Forest, located in northeastern Arizona. Nearby was the town of Snowflake, Arizona, where all of these loggers were from. The loggers included Mike Rogers, who was 28 at the time. He was the oldest of the 7 loggers, and also Travis Walton, which was a really close friend of Mike Rogers. They had spent the full day working on a contract of which they were behind on, and it was getting around 6 o'clock that they had packed up for the day and decided to head back home.
From what I understand, Mike is who had the contract with the Forestry Service, right?
That's correct.
And so he actually hired all the other 6 guys. And he was their boss.
That's right.
Right?
Yep. And he was the oldest of the group at 28.
Bunch of young men, no doubt about it.
Yep. And that's right. And there was a single road that led out of this area of the forest. They were heading down it, and they noticed that there was a light off to the side of the road. And initially, they had thought maybe it was the moon, but no, the moon was in another part of the sky. And then they thought maybe it was a forest fire. It was a golden glow. As they approached it, they could see off to the side of the road through a clearing about 30 yards off the side, 90 feet to 100 feet, give or take, what all of the men in the truck described, and eventually Travis would describe, as a saucer. Just about 20 feet off the ground.
What is it with you and hovering?
I don't know. Hovering. The saucer was hovering off of the ground. Travis shouted, "Stop the truck." And then before the truck even stopped, he was out of the truck heading toward this saucer shape. Once he got close to it, he was underneath it. He had expected it to take off, and it did not. So he crouched behind a log that was there in the field, and all the rest of the guys in the truck were calling to him, "Hey, man, get back here. Get back in the truck." He sort of looked up at the thing. It started to wobble a little bit and give off a sound that both went high and low at the same time. Part of the sound of the saucer would go up to the higher register and some toward the lower register, to the point where you could almost not hear it. Mike Rogers said that was what they heard in the truck as well. So he's like, okay, I need to get out of here. He stands up, and just as he stands up to turn and go back to the truck, all of the men in the truck say that what they saw was a blue light hit Travis, and Travis, almost as if an explosion went off in front of him, threw him back lifeless 10 feet away from where he had been standing. In a panic, the rest of the 6 guys in the truck took off down the road. And there's a movie called Fire in the Sky. And if you see that scene, Mike Rogers says that's pretty accurate from what was going on. They knocked off a mirror off the truck as they went down the road. They were in a panic, and they just went down the road maybe about a quarter of a mile and stopped.
I'm sorry, really mean to interrupt, but I think you can't underestimate how scared these guys were. First of all, they're seeing this flying saucer, strange glowing UFO right after sundown. Travis jumps out and runs, gets a closer look at it, and they're all saying, "Get back in the truck, Travis, get back, don't go around that thing." And about the time he gets under it, squats for a second, and then stands back up, it zaps him with this, they said it was just a super bright beam. Threw him up in the air, he lands on his back. I mean, they're already scared of the UFO. No wonder they punched it and got out of there. All the men are screaming, "It got him, let's go, let's get out of here." And then as they're flying down the road, they're like, "Is it following us? Is it following us?" I mean, they're just super excited. The truck's going all over the place. But then, like Jimmy said, they got down about a half a mile. Mike stopped the truck. Mike was driving, and of course, Travis is one of his best friends, so he slammed on the brakes and
Right. So at this point, they have a conversation about what to do next. Mike Rogers and a couple of the other guys were adamant they needed to go back and search for Travis. And they all agreed to go back. I think in the movie, just Mike goes back, but that's not what happened. They take some artistic license in the movie, I guess, for dramatic effect or for whatever reason. In reality, they all go back, and it takes them a little bit. About 15 minutes is the recollection of Mike. So as they're getting in the truck, they look back to where they came from and see that light, what they think is the saucer, take off to the northeast. which gives them a little bit more comfort, I imagine, that it's okay to head back up there and check to see how Travis is. So they head back up. It takes about 15 minutes to get back to the location and identify where they were. Well, to be clear, this is exactly how Mike Rogers described it. They get up there and they stay in the truck, and they shine the flashlight from the truck out to the meadow first. They're that freaked out, and they're not able to find Travis just looking that way. So then they eventually turn the truck around and put the headlights of the truck into the meadow, and still no Travis. Finally, they all agree to get out of the truck, and shoulder to shoulder, they start moving through the meadow trying to locate him, and they see no sign of him whatsoever. At this point, no idea where Travis is. They can't find him. They decide to get back in the truck to get help. Now, there's a discussion that goes on in the truck as they're driving about what to do next.
Did they say about how long they searched or anything?
I did not hear anything in the 2 interviews I listened to about the length of time that they took to search for Travis, but they saw no sign of him. Probably about 6:30, 7, something like that.
Yeah, it was right after dark when the incident occurred. The sun had just went down because they worked till dark, and then they had to load their tools and everything like that. So maybe 30 minutes after sundown. I was just curious. I've never seen anything either to say they searched for Travis for an hour or 30 minutes, but they all were scared and terrified. They really thought Travis was dead. Then they go back up there and he's nowhere to be found. So now what?
So now they decide to go back to town. Like the scene in the movie, they do go to a diner. There's not that many people in there as the movie showed. Again, dramatic license, I imagine. Mike Rogers did not want to call the police and tell them that they saw a flying saucer. He thought that they wouldn't take them seriously, and then they might not send out people to help search for Travis, and that was one of his concerns. However, Ken Peterson, they consider him the choir boy, and Mike Rogers says that's pretty accurate. Ken was pretty much a choir boy. He was the one who ended up calling the sheriff, not Mike. It was actually a deputy sheriff that he called. And after calling the deputy sheriff called Sheriff Marlon Gillespie, I believe. And they came up, got information from the loggers, and went up and tried to search for Travis and were unable to find him. What happened next is essentially a search for Travis over the course of 4 days. It was a total of 5 days that he was missing, but they called off the search after the 4th day. And they were unable to find any sign of him or any sign that he'd ever been up there. There was just nothing that they could find.
And what the police really thought happened was that those 6 guys, something happened. There was an argument or something up on the mountain. They really thought that Travis may have been murdered and that they hid the body, and they drove into town and decided to tell this UFO story. That's one reason they went on such a search. They honestly thought that some foul play was involved, and the 6 men were being treated that way. They were being questioned over and over. At some point, I can't remember whose suggestion it was, but I imagine it was the police, asked them to all take a polygraph exam.
That's right. They actually all agreed to take the polygraph. Total of 6 of them. They all took the polygraph. 5 of the 6 passed, all saying the same thing, essentially that they had seen a flying saucer.
Do you have those questions? I had that at one time. And what they do when you do a polygraph, now everybody probably knows it's called a lie detector test. It measures stress. I mean, that's all it does. They put sensors around all over your body, and they'll essentially ask the same 4 or 5 questions over and over and see how you respond to it. And I know one of the questions was, did you see Travis Walton hit with a beam from a UFO? And you answer either yes or no, and they all answered yes. Then one of the questions also was, did you murder or know anyone that murdered Travis Walton? And they all said no. So that was 5 tests. They all passed. And the examiner, I've seen an interview with him. I mean, he was a professional, been doing it a long time. He was very surprised. And the first one he took was the youngest one, a guy named Steve. He was only 17 at the time. So he's real young. He's super nervous. He takes him in. And of course, the examiner makes that point. He says that when I'm doing these things and I've got that many guys, he's like, I'm going to take the one that's most scared, most nervous, because most likely he's going to go ahead and confess, and then after he confesses, all the rest will come around, and then that'll be that, and we'll save a lot of time. But he took each and every one of them, and they all passed except for one, and the guy's name is Dallas, and I can't remember if that's his last name or first name.
That's his last name. It's Dallis. His first name's Allen. He had been with the crew for 2 weeks. They had just hired him on, and he had run-ins with the law before.
Right. And that was part of the problem. He had had some run-ins with the law, and his test just came up inconclusive, not yes or no. The examiner said because the guy was being very uncooperative. He just had no warm and fuzzy feelings for law enforcement to start with, and had been in trouble with the law before, and he was being very uncooperative, and that's why the test is inconclusive. Essentially saying inconclusive meant he didn't really even take the test. But later on, down the road, he did take the test and passed. I mean, think about this. You're a sheriff, and 6 young blue-collar men, loggers, tough guys, come down and say, our friend was zapped by a UFO and now we can't find him. I mean, what are you going to think? He's questioning him, asking him, what really happened? Come on, man. Where is he? Where's Travis?
So I think it's important to note also that years later, they were able to get the records from Alan Dallas's polygraph on that date. And of the questions he answered, they were all confirmed. They were all positive. Yeah, truthful. He passed those part of the polygraph to the extent that he took it. But he became frustrated with the process and walked out. So I think that's important to note.
It's a long process. They keep asking you the same questions over and over.
Right.
Did you find the questions?
I didn't. I looked for them. I did see them before as well. They didn't really stand out to me as anything, they didn't really strike me as super interesting. I'm sure they are.
I'm going to look for them. Go ahead and continue with the story.
Right. So anyway, they take the polygraph and pass 5 out of 6, and the 6 partially passed, which, is interesting in and of itself. On the 5th day, Travis makes a call to Dwayne, which I think is that his brother or brother-in-law? He had 2 brothers, Donald and I want to say Dwayne, so maybe it was his younger brother that he called. And
I think his brother's Dwayne.
Yeah.
But now he called his brother-in-law.
Right. He called his brother-in-law, right? And his brother-in-law and his brother showed up, Dwayne and Neff, to pick him up. Now, what's interesting to know at this time is that the operator monitored the call and contacted the sheriff, and the sheriff had one of his men keep an eye out for them because they wanted to intercept them and then find out what had been going on with Travis.
The UFO dumps him out on a road near a gas station that's closed. He goes to a phone booth. He has no money on him, so he has to call his brother-in-law, collect.
Yeah, let's back up just a minute there, because Travis says that he woke up face down with his head on his elbow, and when he turned over, he saw the saucer just right above the road, and it took off at an incredible speed. And then he went down to the gas station at a payphone, called his brother-in-law, and they initially didn't know who he was after he convinced them that it was indeed him.
Yeah, they thought it was a joke.
Right.
Keep in mind, one thing Jimmy hasn't mentioned here is once word got out that a guy was abducted by a UFO, that a logger was, and that all 6 of these other men were involved, everybody descended on the town. It went national very quickly. So there's news, and Snowflake, Arizona is a very small town. And there's all these news people asking all kinds of questions and everything. So it exploded. And that's one reason that, and I'm sure all kinds of crackpots were calling and everything else. So, when Travis tried to call, they thought it was just somebody messing with him and whatever. It took him a little bit to convince him that it was him that Travis needed. And he said, come get me, I need help. And they said that whenever they picked him up, that he was traumatized and that he grabbed his brother and just cried like a baby. And then another thing was Travis thought at first that it was the same night. He didn't realize that he'd been gone for 5 days. His brother said, reach up and feel your face, and he had a 5-day growth of beard and realized that he'd been gone all that time.
So I think it's probably good to stop here. We'll pick this back up in a minute, and let's go back, talk about what he remembered happened to him after he came to after the blast the first time. So
I don't think he really remembered very much until he visited, was it a psychologist or a psychiatrist that used regressive hypnosis on him?
Now, he claims that did not help him remember any additional material. Everything that he said he saw, he already knew, and that no additional material came out of the hypnosis, but what the hypnosis did allow him to do was to articulate his experience rather than provide him with the information of his experience.
Okay. So Travis says that whenever he first woke up, he saw the lights and everything, and he assumed that he had been hurt and he was in the hospital because he was in a great deal of pain. As he was lying on his back, he said he didn't want to move or even open his eyes. He kind of was in and out of consciousness, and then he had this bad taste was covering in his mouth, and his mouth was really dry and he was really thirsty. He finally opened his eyes, and what he saw was what we come to call now the gray aliens. Then he became very agitated, and he jumped up, grabbed something like a tube or something on a table that was nearby, and he was trying to break it off, I guess like you would in a beer bottle or something, and fight with these. And then he said that these beings left the room, and that I think they went out of the room and turned right. So he left the room and turned left and went in the opposite direction. Walked along for a while until he found another being. This one looked like a human, and it had a space helmet on. And he kept talking to this individual and asking all kinds of questions. He just before he ran into the human, he did say he walked into some room that had some control panels, and the whole wall looked like outer space.
Hey, have you read Heinlein's Have Spacesuit Will Travel?
Yeah, I know. Some people have definitely drawn a correlation to this. But at any rate, he goes into this room. He sees a couple of the other humans with the helmets on, the space helmets, and then they put him back to sleep, and that's it. That's about all he can remember. Is there anything I left out?
No, other than he did when he was laying on the table the first time he woke up, he did try to push away two of the three aliens, the two to the right, and he did make contact with them, said that they were spongy, but much lighter than he expected them to be. And even in his weakened state, he was able to push them back fairly easily.
And I remember one other thing he said when he was following the first human-looking alien, he walked through a hangar area where there was a couple of saucer-shaped UFOs.
So what was really interesting about that was, even in the state he was in, he said that as he descended the ramp, he described it almost like the room that he went into was an airlock. That's how he described it. And then they went down from that into a room down a ramp. And he described it as a large hangar where there were several other smaller saucer discs in the room. And he didn't get the feeling of movement. So he wasn't sure whether it was a vehicle, in outer space, or whether it was a building on the ground. He just didn't get any sense of movement when they were taking him from one place to another.
There was the room that he walked in that looked like it had a control panel, and it looked like he was in space. So he just assumes it was some type of mothership or something in space, I think, right?
Right. Yeah, the walls were semi-transparent, as he described them, and that on the walls you could see stars, outer space essentially. Now, whether he was in outer space or not, who knows? But that's what he claimed to experience.
Anyway, like we said, Travis gets back. That's all he can really remember from his 5 days. Says he lost about 11 or 12 pounds. And they took him to where?
To a doctor in Phoenix to have him checked out.
How far is Phoenix from Snowflake?
That I don't know off the top of my head, but we can look up real quick. The distance from 173 miles from Snowflake, Arizona.
It's about a 3 or 4 hour drive. If I'm not mistaken, his brother, Dwayne, kind of managed Travis because Travis was very traumatized after his, whatever had happened to him, missing the 5 days. He really said he was a basket case. He couldn't think or anything. He was really traumatized, and there was press everywhere. And they took him to this hospital. It was a pretty long way away. Maybe they did it just to get out of town. But I'm wanting to say he was examined by some UFO-friendly people. And I think he had been in contact, Dwayne had been in contact with like NICAP or APRO, or maybe it was a local UFO group or something.
Yeah, there was 2 UFO groups that actually got involved with this. The first group was Ground Saucer Watch.
That's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I don't know very much about them, but they were the first ones to get involved. Walton never boarded the UFO. That's according to...
Well, he doesn't remember any of that.
Yeah, he doesn't remember any of that. So that's pretty much a given. If he did go on board the UFO, it wasn't observed by anybody, I guess is the point. The stuff that came out of Ground Saucer Watch as they learned more about the incident was that the entire Walton family had a continual UFO history. 2 of the 3 boys had reported observing 10 to 15 separate UFO sightings. Dwayne, when questioned about his brother's disappearance, stated that Travis will be found, that UFOs are friendly. And then when GSW countered, that's the Ground Saucer Watch, how do you know Travis will be found? Dwayne said, I have this feeling, a very strong feeling.
And I know that Dwayne also made the comment during that interview, and this is while Travis is still missing. Dwayne made the comment that we both have an agreement, if we ever see a flying saucer, we'll go run up to it.
Right.
Yeah, from a skeptic point of view, that's a little suspicious, because that's exactly what Travis did. Or him and Dwayne had that agreement, and that's why he did it.
Right. Could be. You could go either way with that.
Especially if Dwayne had been seeing flying saucers in the area.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I don't know that moves the needle much either way.
Right. I mean, it kind of cancels itself out in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, all the skeptics are going to point to that, because they also said his mother wasn't very concerned, too, the skeptics. Any other just facts we need to throw out before we start kind of looking at this and like pointing out some things like that? Here's 2 things that I want to talk about before maybe we start looking at the skeptical side. Are there any other events, though, that you can think of in this that are significant before we start maybe looking at the skeptical part of it?
Yeah, maybe just as an overall recap in some ways of what evidence we actually have and don't have. We don't have a lot of physical evidence. We have a total of 13 polygraphs that were given, with a total of 9 individuals tested. The tests for the 6 loggers were control test questions, which we'll get to that when we start talking about the validity of polygraphs. Also, Walton's mother and brother were tested. 11 of the tests were passed out of the 13. Dallas's first polygraph test wasn't a pass, it was an inconclusive, and we already talked about it was a partial pass, and it was inconclusive because he actually walked out and didn't finish it. Walton's first polygraph was a fail. That was done by a different individual that was using a process called the relevant-irrelevant test, and we'll talk a little bit about the validity of that test. It's a more outdated and not as valid, and isn't the type of test that's used in the court of law, for example. I think that's just about it. We just have no evidence other than the polygraph.
Okay, here's a couple of things that I want to bring up. Travis isn't the first abduction of UFOs. There's some others, but I have 2 of the famous ones. And the first one we've talked a little bit about on the show before is the Betty and Barney Hill abduction that occurred in 1961. This one was the first widely publicized case in the United States. And at first, they didn't know what was wrong with them. Betty in particular was having bad dreams. They both were kind of stressed. They sought psychiatric help. And under hypnosis, they were able to remember that they were abducted, where they had no memory before other than Betty had had some unusual dreams. There was a book published called Interrupted Journey, and it was published in 1966. It was a very popular book. And I think this is an important point in a way. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But there was a made-for-TV movie by the same name starring James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons that aired only 2 weeks before Travis disappeared. Have you ever watched that movie? I found it on YouTube.
No, I'm aware of its existence. I haven't ever watched it.
Yeah, check it out. I mean, I remember it when I was a kid. Back in those days in the 70s, there was 3 major networks and PBS.
And PBS.
Not a lot of people watched PBS.
I watched it all the time on Saturday mornings. They had Kung Fu Theater, Buck Rogers, and sometimes they'd have cowboy shows. Okay. It's a good time.
But most people watch one of the 3 major networks. So you got to remember, it's not like it is today where everything's so diversified and we've got zillions of channels and YouTube and everything else. So that was a very popular movie, got very good ratings because it was based on this alleged UFO abduction. That had aired only 2 weeks before. Now, another case I'd like to bring up is in 1973, there was Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker in Pascagoula, and I practice saying that word too.
How do you say it? Pascagoula?
Pascagoula, Mississippi. So in 1973 in Pascagoula, Mississippi, there was Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. The 2 men were fishing, and they were abducted right after dark. They saw some giant glowing ball. When they first got abducted, they tried to decide what to do. First they said, and then they were returned and everything, and they were saying that let's not tell anybody, right? But then one of them decides, you know what, this thing may be going around abducting all kinds of people. We need to tell someone. So they tried to call the Air Force, and the Air Force said, we don't take reports of UFOs anymore. So they called the sheriff, and they felt that they should warn people is why they did it. And it makes you wonder, are there other abduction cases where people are just like, I'm not telling anybody? You know, maybe tell your family or friends or whatever, but we never hear about it, right? So the police became convinced there was something to this case because he'd questioned both men a little bit, but then he left a concealed tape recorder going in the interrogation room and stepped out of the room for a few minutes, and both men were scared to death, and you know, he left the tape going. And you can actually find on YouTube and some other places recordings of this, of them and how scared they were and upset. It was obvious something had happened to them. And because if there was a hoax, after the sheriff left, they more than likely would have been like, oh man, I hope he believes it or whatever. But, that's the thing that convinced the sheriff that something had happened. And another interesting aspect about this case is their abductors are not the blue aliens that you expect. Their abductors were these very odd looking, like rough looking, wrinkly, tall creatures that floated down about the same size as a man, maybe slightly smaller. Not at all like you've heard from other UFO abduction cases. They asked the police to keep it quiet. They didn't want their employers to know that this happened. I think they worked at the same shipyard or something. They didn't want anybody to know what happened. And the cops let the cat out of the bag. And then the press got a hold of it and went crazy. So they didn't do as they were asked. And then one of them I know really had a real hard time. The young one had a really hard time dealing with it afterwards. And but they both began to speak about it at conventions and things like that. And I think there's a book out of it, I'm sure. I think Calvin or Hickson, I think, wrote the book originally. But yeah. Anyway, so that's just a couple of other abductions that had happened right before. And one thing I would like to point out when we look at abductions is that this TV movie that came out 2 weeks before Travis was abducted has a certain description of the aliens that are in the movie that is the same thing basically Travis described. But then in 1973, before a movie was ever made, but the book, The Interrupted Journey, was well known, and I'm sure they were interviewed, and you know, the Hills were interviewed. It's a pretty well known thing. It only happened a few years before, 7 years before, so I'm sure they made the talk show rounds and everything when the book was coming out. So they had no doubt heard about a UFO abduction, but had never really seen what the abductors would have looked like, right? So I'm not trying to say anything necessarily, other than I think it's interesting that Hickson and Parker's abductors looked vastly different than Travis Walton's or Betty and Barney Hill's. And that now all abductors, I think, because I can't decide, is it because this movie came out and now it's just everywhere. Everyone knows what the Greys look like. Is that why they see those aliens? Is it because it's already in their consciousness, is the point I'm making.
Sure. I mean, it's possible.
Like, for instance, Travis, he says he was able to remember what happened on the ship, but he still had to be hypnotized somehow. He says it wasn't through regressive hypnosis, but he still was hypnotized. And almost everyone's memories of these events, not all, but most everyone's, is derived from aggressive hypnosis. I actually believe that he was abducted by a UFO. I personally believe that. Okay, just saying. But I'm not wholly convinced of his experiences on the ship, just because of how close it was to that movie coming out, and he only remembered a little bit. So maybe it was, but I'm just saying that section of the story, I don't know, because again, I think now we see all these abduction cases, and all the aliens are described the same, but we have this one before that phenomenon happened, before that movie came out, where the abductors are completely different looking. And no one else has ever described abductors that look that way. You see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I guess. This is a really hard one for me because I like the way Hynek, I believe it was Hynek, couched this, that there's actually Yeah, I'll break it into two events. One event is the logger seeing something in the woods, and the second event is Travis experiencing an abduction event. Based on what I understand about polygraphs, having read quite a bit over the past week, by no means am I an expert, but my understanding is that for 6 individuals to be able to fool a polygraph on any single question, all 6 of them, is like 1 in a million chance. To do that with 5 questions is essentially impossible. They definitely saw something, and the way they articulated it was consistent, so I'm inclined to believe they saw a saucer. Now, the second part, which is Travis's articulation of what happened to him, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, it's really difficult when you watch Travis communicate what he saw in all the interviews he's had over all these years. It's fairly consistent, but then again, so is Bob Lazar. You know how I feel about that. I don't know what to make of it. Even Mike Rogers and the art interview that they had with Travis and with Mike Rogers, they were so matter-of-fact and confident in the way in which they corrected the events in the movie as they deviated from the actual events they said they experienced. It's I don't know.
Let me ask you a question, though. Have you ever had an event happen to you in your life that you've had to explain a lot? Maybe you had a car accident, and you've had to tell all your friends and family about it, and co-workers.
Not that I can remember.
The thing is you kind of learn how to tell the story.
True. Yes, I agree.
And I mean, I've experienced that myself. You know, I had an accident a few years ago. I had to tell the police what happened to start with, and then after that, I get to work, and I got to tell my coworkers what happened, and then I got to tell my family what happened, and then I got to tell other family members what happened, and other friends what happened. By the time I've told that story, I get pretty good at recounting it, and I find myself telling the same. I mean, even though it's absolutely true, you know what I mean? It's sort of like, I know what you mean when you hear somebody, just like when you hear Travis talking about being on the ship. He's told that story so many times. He's probably told that story hundreds of times. It's going to sound a little canned, I guess, in a way. I personally believe that he believes that happened to him exactly as he says. And he's passed several polygraphs himself. Now, the fact that he failed the very first one he took, you know, you made the comment that it was a different method. He was originally scheduled to take a polygraph with the same individual that had tested all the rest of them, but he never showed up. And Dwayne, his brother, had said that he was just too nervous, too stressed out. You know, there's no doubt he had post-traumatic stress because of that event. I mean, of course, the people that didn't believe him and everything, you know, they're just like, come on, man, take that polygraph. Why don't you take that polygraph? You must be lying. What were you saying were the details? What is the details of the older method, the very first, and why did he end up taking the polygraph with this individual?
So we can get into the weeds here pretty quickly, so I don't want to necessarily do that. I just want to convey...
What do you think we need to cover before we just get on down to...
talk about that, the relevant, irrelevant format still used for like employee polygraphs, and I don't know if anyone out there has ever had one. It's basically asking you questions like, have you ever stolen anything from a previous employer? Have you ever taken anything home from an employer? It's just one question after another that's relevant to whatever the situation that you want to cover is about. Dr. David Raskin, who's a recognized authority on polygraph, described the technique of the relevant, irrelevant format as 30 years out of date, and that was at the time that they administered it to Travis. So I'm not so sure that that's probably the best indicator. And also the private investigator who administered the test, while he did have quite a bit of experience with that particular style of polygraph questions, he had maybe 20 years. It's 30 years out of date, and most people agree that it has almost the same chance of giving you a positive result as flipping a coin. So it's not something they really put a lot of weight on, and it's not something that you can use in court of law for those states that do allow polygraphs to be entered as evidence. They rely mostly for those on the control test questions, which was the format that the 6 loggers were given, and that the second test that was given to Travis. The relevant irrelevant was performed by John McCarthy, a private investigator. The follow-up was done by George Pfeiffer, who ruled Walton truthful. Subsequently, both the mother and the brother were tested by Pfeiffer, and they both passed. And then again in 1993, Cy Gleason retested Walton, Rogers, and Dallas, who was the one who had a contentious relationship with Travis Walton and Mike Rogers. All three of those passed at that time.
Yeah, they've had several polygraphs done through the years, and I think it's extraordinary. I know if something like that happened to me, I would probably just say, I don't care if you believe it or not. I'm not taking a polygraph. I've just been through hell for 5 days. I want to lay down for a while, okay? And I want to get on with my life. Now, you want to believe I was abducted by a UFO? That's fine. You don't have to. That's fine, too. What are you going to do? I mean, I know the police, maybe if they thought that he had perpetuated a hoax, they would arrest him for something, especially after they had the search parties and all that up there. That costs money. The fact that he believes his story so much, and the other men are just willing to do these polygraphs almost anytime someone asks. So I think it's real important to point out, too, with this case, and when you see Travis talk about this, is that it's almost was probably more traumatic than actually being abducted by a UFO, was the fact that all these debunkers started coming after him, just writing up all kinds of stuff. And one of the big ones of the day was a guy named Philip Klass. He was essentially a professional debunker, and he wrote different books and things. And Travis himself, I saw in an interview, said that this guy called everybody he knew, former employers, all kinds of anybody he could think of that knew him, but he never one time talked to Travis. So what he's trying to do is run Travis's reputation down. He wasn't interested in talking to Travis at all. So these guys are out there. Again, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, you have skeptics, which are people that are like, I don't know, let's look at all the facts. Then you have debunkers that no matter what it is, they're going to find something wrong with the story. So I'm going to go over a couple things Philip Klass in his book came up with. He wrote a book called UFO Public Deceived. And this is some of the things that he discussed. He said that at 1:30 a.m., after they abandoned the search for Travis, Mike Rogers and Copeland went to notify Walton's mother of her son's disappearance, and he said that she had a calm response upon being awakened and told her youngest son had been kidnapped by a UFO, and said, well, that's the way these things happen. And then she proceeded to describe 2 instances when she and or her oldest son, Dwayne, had also seen UFOs. Later that morning, when she notified Walton's sister, she said that a flying saucer got him. Mrs. Neff surprised Copeland with how calmly she took the news. Maybe if you believe in UFOs and think that, or maybe she just has a calm demeanor. But anyway, Philip Klass thought that was a red flag. Shortly before Walton's alleged abduction, he had told his mother that if I ever get abducted by a UFO, not to worry because he would be fine. They said, curiously, there was no physical evidence of anything happening in spite of the explosive force of the blue-green beam. Dry pine needles lay undisturbed on the forest floor. No blood, shreds of clothing, no evidence of blast effects were found by any of the 50 searchers involved. Walton's other brother, Donald, also felt that UFO story was a cover for something else. To this end, Rogers and his crew volunteered to take polygraphs. UFologists interviewed both Rogers and Dwayne. The tape of this conversation reveals several striking details. Not once during the entire 65-minute interview did Dwayne or Rogers express any concern over Walton's well-being. Rogers described the UFO as beautiful. Dwayne stated he had been seeing UFOs over the past 10 or 12 years. This is some of what you talked about, Jimmy. I've been seeing them all the time. He also stated that he and his brother Travis had made an agreement to immediately get as directly under an object as physically possible if one of them ever saw a UFO. Dwayne went on to state that he felt Walton was having the experience of a lifetime. All I can say is I wish I was with him. And then when he goes to the polygraph examinations, he was asked 4 relevant questions, 3 of which dealt with whether Walton had been seriously injured or killed by one or more members of the crew. The 4th question added at the last minute was, did you tell the truth about actually seeing a UFO last Wednesday when Travis Walton disappeared? And he talks about that. If an actual UFO did exist and the UFO is a man-made hoax, 5 of these men had no prior knowledge of a hoax. So, and I know he questions also, whether the polygraph was conducted right. So let's say it was a hoax. What it would mean, despite all the stuff that Dwayne was saying, yeah, that does seem odd that he's saying, we've made an agreement we would go run under a UFO if we ever saw one. And despite all that stuff and the calmness that they are, not having any real concern for him, which does, raise a little bit of a red flag. But let's say it is a hoax. Who else helped Travis do it? And then how can Travis still pass this polygraph? Because just like you said, there's no way those 6 men, 5 of them, completely passed that polygraph. The odds are just astronomical against that. There's just no way. I mean, there was no way. So none of them could have known anything about a hoax. So then you're saying, okay, maybe the Dallas guy was in on the hoax. That's why he was being uncooperative during the polygraph, right? But I would say, and Dwayne took the hoax. So the way Dwayne's talking, you're thinking, okay, maybe this was some big hoax that Dwayne and Travis fabricated, and, so they could get the National Enquirer involved and make money off the deal, which is what happened. Because that's what Philip Klass says. It's totally a hoax, even despite all of these past, and they put a lot of emphasis, the debunkers put all the emphasis on Travis not showing up for the first polygraph because he was still stressed and upset. And then they put a lot of emphasis on the first failed one, but then that was an old technique and an old test. But every single other polygraph he's ever taken, he's passed, Travis, and the other men too. None of the others have failed. Now, I do want to mention one thing. There apparently used to be some show on TV where you could go up and take a polygraph, I guess, on NBC called...
Yeah, so the name of that show, it was on July the 31st of 2008. He appeared on The Moment of Truth.
Moment of Truth. But even Michael Shearer, who's a big UFO skeptic, he even agrees that the techniques they use on that show were not very good, that you could easily get a false positive or false negative. Michael Shearer, he has an article on it. He still believes it's some kind of hoax or whatever, but he thinks Travis thinks he thinks it happened. But at any rate, even he agrees that TV show wasn't a very good test of the truth. And after that, Travis went and had another polygraph taken, and he passed. Yeah, just want to mention that in case anybody's a skeptic out there. It's like, hey, wait a minute, they didn't mention that game show where he failed the polygraph on that. But Travis had just lost his job. He said he would have never went on there, but he had just lost his job, got laid off or something, and he needed some money.
Yeah, the Moment of Truth is an interesting thing because there was a written court-certified polygraph expert back in 2004 that shortly after the show debuted, he said the polygraph aspect of the show has no validity whatsoever. The test format will not determine truth or deception. In fact, the GAO test showed such methods would yield as high as 80% false positives. There you go. Yeah, I would throw that one out completely. And I'm the skeptic here, baby.
Yeah, but it's tough to be skeptical on this one. I mean, and again, that's the biggest part of the story, in a way, beyond the UFO abduction, which seems to have happened, is how this Philip Klass just seemed to have a vendetta against him and just, wrote all kinds of articles. He run down. Oh, another big thing that he said was that Mike Rogers was way behind on the contract with the forestry department or whatever, and he was way behind on his contract, and they perpetuated this hoax so he could delay the contract or get out of the contract. Well, Mike said, I've seen him interviewed about that. He said, that's ridiculous because they didn't let me extend the contract. I never even asked for that. So he said that's just a stupid reason. But that is, the skeptics will list that as one of the reasons why this hoax happened. But they just will not accept the polygraphs. Because let me ask you something.
Mm-hmm.
What if those men would have failed those polygraphs? What if one man would have failed that polygraph test? those skeptics would have jumped all over it. Those debunkers would have been like, look, the one man failed the polygraph test. That means he was in on it with Travis somehow. The debunkers totally disregard it. They act like that's not a fact. But those polygraphs are a fact, and they are important to this case. It's just impossible. It literally is impossible that all of those men who really didn't know, most of them didn't know each other that well, all of them passed this polygraph, and they continue to pass the polygraphs.
So I struggle with this case quite a bit because I look at it, there's two sides of it that I have trouble reconciling. On the one side, it's the polygraph evidence, and I'm willing to take that at face value. It makes sense to me that it's highly unlikely, to the point of being improbable, that all 6 of these men see something and then pass polygraphs confirming that they saw something, that in some way could be a hoax, and that they perpetuate this for 45 years or whatever it's been since that happened. I find that unbelievable that it could be a hoax. So that's on one side. And then the other side is all this other information that comes out about how the family reacts and the immediate aftermath. There is so much in there that screams hoax in my mind, though there is a possibility, maybe not, but there's just so much in there that just screams a hoax. I just don't know how to put the two pieces together. You know what I mean? It just even the fact that Travis had absolutely no injuries, that there's no evidence to disprove that he was abducted because there was no evidence. There's only the word of these 6 loggers that they saw a saucer in a clearing. There's no physical evidence. Even the urine sample that Travis provided wasn't provided by Travis. It was handed over by Dwayne, and we have no knowledge of whether it was actually Travis's or not. If he was out in the woods for 5 days, that urine would show that he had started eating his own fat. His body started eating his own fat.
Would have shown acetane
in his. Right, exactly. And that's not what they saw. But we have no guarantee that was his. The only indicator that he had any marks on his body whatsoever was in the inside of his right elbow, which they thought was a injection point.
Mm-hmm. Or look, I heard that one of the doctors said it looked like a mark on his elbow where blood had been drawn.
But it was not over a vein.
Okay, then an injection. I don't know.
An injection point, yeah. So I don't know what to make of all of the behavior of the family, which seems very odd to me, and all of the subsequent stuff that happened, including the fact that both initially Jeff Wells, who was one of the members of the National Inquiry team, and then also the initial Ground Saucer Watch team, both thought that these guys were perpetuating a hoax. So that was, that's the initial sense of some of the folks who saw the thing firsthand the immediate days after. I don't know how to reconcile those two things. It's difficult. So I really think they probably saw a saucer. I don't know how to, that polygraph information is so compelling in my mind, unless somebody can come forward and explain to me how that stuff could be fake and how people for 45 years would not come forward in any way, shape, or form and offer a different opinion or say that this didn't happen, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, when I look at it, I think, well, what if Travis and Dwayne were in on this hoax and they set all that up somehow, and Travis run out there away from the truck? Where's the guarantee that, let's say the other men weren't in on it somehow, and then Dwayne and Travis are going to do this, and they run over there and he runs away, and then somehow they make it look like that, and then they just hide Travis for 5 days, right? And because it's all coming from Dwayne and his brother-in-law, they're the ones that picked him up and all that kind of stuff, right? So
Certainly possible.
That way you can get past the other men not having a polygraph, right? But there's just, if you're doing that hoax, where's the guarantee? How do they know nobody else would go? How do they know Mike would stop the truck? All those.
Well, they
things.
don't know any of that stuff, and they don't seem like they don't seem as if at that age in your early 20s. Come on,
Yeah,
None
it's
of us are
22
really
years
super
old.
sharp.
I mean, it's like,
Yeah,
where's
we're not sharp in our 20s.
Yeah, where's the genius there to set up all this kind of stuff? So,
Well, what I'm saying is it doesn't take genius. You just set the stuff up, do it, and think it's going to work, and you got lucky. It could happen.
Right.
Certainly.
But then also to be
know?
able to take everything down after he just went a half a mile down the road, and then they go up there and start searching for him, and now there's nothing there.
I'm with you on this. I think it's terribly improbable, but possible still. It's still possible, but very improbable.
So a couple things. The reaction of the family and the interviews, maybe they really believed what they said. And then we don't know that Travis said that about being zapped by, a saucer. We don't really know that. But there was the taped interview. I mean, again, Philip Klass, I'm sure, would have fabricated a few things to try and push this issue, right? I don't doubt it. I actually think he was probably on the government payroll to try and tamp down UFOs, but maybe not. He was a writer for Aviation Week, I think. But
that's right. He had a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, I think. But I did read Klass's stuff, and I didn't find it quite as offensive as I thought it would once I read his actual stuff, but I did find it very slanted. And if you could put the information that you took in a very biased way, I think he did. I don't know that he was objective enough to really
just totally dismiss the polygraphs. I mean, it all revolves back to the polygraphs. And I don't know how all of those men, I mean, this guy was certified by the police department. This could be used for evidence. I mean, Travis recently, or the one he took after that game show he did in New Mexico, where they can actually use a polygraph, evidence of a polygraph in a court of law. So they're pretty darn sure about theirs. He specifically went down there and had one done because of that. So, for me, I mean, it all hinges on the polygraphs, whether you have to take that into account. So all of those men, including Travis, believe that happened. We just have to say that. And I just don't know how, because for one thing, let's say Travis got zapped by the UFO and then he wandered around in the woods for 5 days lost or something. I mean, and then that's why he was gone and underweight and all this kind of stuff.
Well, that's really hard to say that that's what happened.
But again, all those people were searching for him.
And for 2 of those days that he was missing, temperatures dropped well below zero.
Okay.
And, I found it hard to believe that he'd be out there for 5 days and be able to survive. It's not unheard of, for sure, but, man, it'd be tough.
Well, and then
I've been out in the woods. Let me tell you, I've been out in the woods with clothes that were meant for cold weather in negative 10 degrees.
Yeah, when you're not moving around, just camping, it's miserable.
I can't imagine that you'd survive that.
No, probably couldn't. He had hyperthermia for sure. So
yeah.
So anyway, I mean, when you get down to it, his family, their reaction. I mean, I do get annoyed by this sometimes. I mean, the police didn't really find it suspicious, but of course Philip Klass does. They did say some kind of off-the-wall things. But, people just react to things differently. And maybe they really wasn't that worried. Maybe they thought he was having the time of his life. I mean, just because they said that, makes it look like they're guilty of a hoax. I mean, maybe they really thought, hey, man, that's so cool. I wish I could go on a ride on a flying saucer. I don't know. But then my point is that his mother reacted a certain way and everything. People just react to things a different way. I mean, I think it's a little suspicious too. I'm going to say it would raise a red flag. Let me just say it that way if I was truly investigating the case. But I just firmly believe that all of those men most definitely think what happened or what they claim happened. Travis was zapped by a UFO and picked up by that UFO and was on it for 5 days and then returned at a nearby town. I mean, they believe that. I mean, I don't think they've fabricated that. I just don't, because of all the polygraphs and hearing their stories. And I just don't, I mean, I get it. They financially did make some money from this event, but I think the hell that they had to go through to get that was probably not necessarily worth it. I mean, think about it. This has defined Travis Walton's life. I mean, he's that UFO guy now. He didn't move, so everybody in town knows who he is. I mean, he's had to embrace this and become the Travis Walton experience. I mean, that's who he is now. Nobody cares about anything else in his life, right? About his family or anything. He's the UFO guy.
Well, one thing else I want to bring up here is that we're focusing on the family and how they responded, but we're not talking about Donald, the other brother. And Donald was convinced that there was foul play involved. He was hopping mad, is the way Mike Rogers described him. He was not happy with any of the loggers or their explanation. He was convinced that there was foul play involved. So not before he was found, one brother was A-okay with everything, and one brother was not. So that's worth mentioning, I think. It's such a hard case.
Yeah, it almost feels like Travis and Dwayne were in on it if you want to go down the hoax road, but I think it's a pretty solid case for what happened. I don't have an issue thinking that maybe they were picked up by a UFO or whatever. I mean, I believe UFOs are real. They are real. We know that. The government's admitted that they're real. So I personally, for me, I think that this probably happened.
I'm still uncomfortable with UFOs being intelligently operated vehicles of some unknown non-terrestrial or maybe multidimensional beings, however you want to put it. I don't want to parse words here, but not any terrestrial common sense explanation. I'm very uncomfortable with that, but I will say this: if any case for abductions would sway me, this one moves the needle for me quite a bit in that direction, where I could see very plausibly that at the very least they saw something that they were convinced were a saucer. And we never mentioned physical evidence in terms of they went back to that site years later and checked the trees out, and So in Chernobyl, when they did some, and they're still doing this, there's a bunch of scientific exploration of what happens after something like Chernobyl. And for those younger listeners out there who aren't knowledgeable on this, that there was a nuclear reactor meltdown in Russia in a town called Chernobyl. And they're still doing research on what the impact of that was. It affected a great area around the city itself. And, they had to vacate everybody out of there. Everybody had to leave. And you still can't go there. But one thing they noticed is that it increased the growth rate of the trees. And you can see it in the tree rings. So what they saw in the area where Travis Walton was supposedly abducted, that the tree rings grow faster in the direction where that saucer was located. Also, soil samples were taken in the area, and the soil samples within that area where the saucer was supposedly located was higher in several different minerals than the surrounding area. Things like iron and zinc, for example. Calcium, I think, was also another one, which was abnormally high compared to the surrounding area outside of that circle. So something, I don't know what to make of that. Maybe it could occur naturally, maybe not, but it's worth mentioning.
I think it's a pretty damn big coincidence, man. I mean, here we have the area where a flying saucer was sighted, and all these years later, the growth rings show that on those sides of those trees, all around that clearing, they've shown extraordinary growth. I mean, very noticeable growth. And I know the investigator that uncovered that would like for some type of college or university to look at it with him and hopefully dig deeper into it. But of course, no mainstream scientist will ever touch that because it's connected to a UFO case. So they would never ever investigate that, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think what I'll do is I'll put a link, because they actually have photographs of those tree rings in that area, so you can really get a sense about how dramatic the difference is in the tree growth.
Now, that's another just key piece of evidence that seems to point toward a real flying saucer being there and zapping Travis. The only kind of questionable thing I have, and again, this is just, I guess I'll go 50-50 since you're always wanting damn percentages.
Thank you.
I'm going to go 50-50 on what he experienced in the ship. And again, the only reason is the influence he may have had on his subconscious mind of the made-for-TV movie, the Betty and Barney Hill. Now, I know Travis might come forward and say, I never even saw that movie, and that's fine. I mean, I'm just saying that is one thing that I can't 100% say, yeah, I think that happened. I think that's his experience. If it is his experience, great. Like I said, I'm just kind of undecided about that part of it, again, because I'm a little undecided about abductions, at least the way they exist today. But I do think Travis Walton was zapped by a UFO and picked up for 5 days. I think, again, that's just another piece of evidence there. What?
I'm gonna be like you on this one. I'm gonna say that I'm not gonna give any percentages on what he experienced inside the UFO.
Well, okay.
But I am on, like, in terms of seeing the saucer, man, I'm gonna put that up 80-90%.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether
that's where I'm at. I'm like 90% that actually the saucer event happened. I just think it would be too difficult to perpetuate a hoax and not some of those men in the truck be in on it. And, you got to remember Travis and Dwayne are the logical ones to sound like, okay, these are the guys that did the hoax, but they passed polygraphs as well. And Travis continues to pass polygraphs to this day.
Well, we really never got into the contentious relationship between Alan Dallas and Travis Walton and Mike Rogers,
right,
for example. And even Alan Dallas, who had run-ins with the law, I mean, he passes 2 polygraphs.
Mm-hmm.
I find it almost impossible that they didn't see something that they observed that they interpreted as a saucer in that matter.
Yeah, I mean, Dallas had no reason to stick up for Travis. They'd had several run-ins together while they were working
arguably
together.
Every reason to not stick up for him, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that's one reason they were kind of suspecting him of the foul play, and they thought the other men were covering up until Travis was found. So again, it's very convincing. In fact, I find it, just as you said earlier, probably the most convincing case for UFO abduction out there, just because of all the witnesses. This is the only case that I'm aware of. There's probably others. I know there is another one that has multiple witnesses too, where a woman was abducted out of her home. Maybe we'll look into that case one of these days. I can't remember the name of it. I do know that, and there was some people there, like her father was there.
Oh, yeah. I know the case you're talking about. That's a pretty famous case.
Yeah, I can't think of that. Now, I know there were multiple witnesses, but this case is just so unlike any other case. The fact that all these men seen it, they all passed these polygraphs. I mean, it's just a 1,000,000 to 1 odds that they would be able to all pass a polygraph, including Travis, who would have had to been a participant in the hoax, and Dwayne, who's the logical other choice that would be a participant in a hoax based on his language and the way he talked, at least be in on it or have knowledge of it. But he passed polygraphs as well. So, I think it's a very, very convincing case. I mean, one of the other convincing cases I have is the Pascagoula one as well. I think something happened to those 2 men.
Yeah, that's an interesting case, and I think that deserves its own case file and discussion.
Yeah, we'll look into it for sure. But anyway, is there anything else you want to bring up on this?
No, I think we've covered this pretty thoroughly. The one thing I would love is to have an opportunity to talk to Travis and maybe even his brother, and I don't know that his mother's still with us, but to talk with him and his brother and discuss, some of these problems with the story that have been brought up, and maybe we can get some insight and clarity into, what exactly they were thinking at the time. It would be really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer those questions. I mean, he doesn't want to be like accused now and all that. And I mean, I would certainly, if we ever get him on the show, would certainly be friendly to him. But it'd be interesting to ask a few of those questions. And I'm sure Travis has logical explanations for that, or his brother would, if we could maybe get them both on the show, if he would even be willing to do it. But I've never seen Dwayne interviewed on anything. And I've seen, because I watched, there's a good documentary called The Travis Walton Experience. Is that what it's called? It's on, the book's called The Walton Experience.
Oh, you're talking.
You know what that did you watch?
Oh yeah,
that
you're talking about the one that's on Amazon. Yeah, and it's called The True Story of Travis Walton. It's a documentary, and he does cover some of the Philip Glass stuff in that.
Mm-hmm. He does. He mostly talks about how everyone was, how people just really went after him, to try and prove that it was a hoax or something. But it's a good documentary. If you're interested in this case, it's most definitely movie you want to watch. And I found the people being interviewed to be most convincing. They have the gentleman that conducted the polygraph tests. They have most of the men, not all of them. I think they had Mike Rogers and two of the other men, maybe three of the other men. Steve's on there, the young one. Oh, one thing we forgot to mention, one thing he talks about in that particular documentary, and again, all we have is Steve, the young man's, what's his last name? I forget, but he claims that Philip Glass took him out to dinner one night and offered him $10,000 to say it was a
was
hoax.
Steve Pierce,
and he was the young one. He was 17. So I don't know if we have any corroborating witnesses on that, but just worth throwing out there that, as long as Philip Glass is going to talk about odd behavior or little things he said, she said, that is something Steve Pierce said, that he was offered $10,000. And again, if that's true, I'm convinced Philip Glass was, he was in Washington. That's all I'm saying. There's no doubt. This is, again, it all goes back to the Robertson panel, goes back to the Condon Committee. They thought it was very important to keep UFOs tamped down. UFOs need to stay out of the mainstream, and we don't want people talking about them. But we've always been fascinated with them. But it's worked. It's worked for the most part. So people really aren't looking that much into UFOs. So it wouldn't surprise me that one reason a guy like Philip Glass was so enthusiastic about debunking cases and put so much work and effort into it, it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't, work for the CIA or have some connections.
Yeah, I don't have any feelings on that one way or the other. I do think, though, after reading his material, that he definitely had a skewed perspective.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what he did. He was just a debunker.
Yeah. So The Fire in the Sky is the name of the movie that came out about the incident. And then if you're going to watch that and want to really understand the difference between the artistic license of the movie versus what actually occurred as dictated by like Mike Rogers or Travis Walton, I would recommend that you listen to that 1996 interview with Mike Rogers, Travis Walton, done by Art Bell. It's really good, and they almost go scene by scene and talk about the differences, and it's a good insight into both the movie and what really happened. And I have to admit that I haven't seen the movie all the way through. I started watching it last week and fell asleep before he even got abducted. But it has James Gardner.
Yeah, oh my God! You fell asleep before you even got abducted?
A lot happens before then.
You fell asleep in the first 20 minutes or something.
Probably.
Man.
Probably.
Damn.
It wasn't a very exciting movie for me. There was no chest popping aliens, and there was no kung fu, so I get distracted easily.
I've seen the movie numerous times, maybe 3 or 4 times, if that much. I went to the theater and saw it when it came out in 1993. Mm-hmm. I was familiar with the Travis Walton case. I definitely wanted to see it. The main thing I will tell you that is different between the movie and real life is his experience on the ship. And the filmmakers will tell you that the studio heads, when they read the script, said, well, this is all boring. We need to make it something else. And they turn it basically into a horror movie when he's on board the ship. So his experiences and I'm sure Travis will tell you too, in no way reflect what he says happened to him on the ship. In no way at all. So yeah, it's a pretty terrifying little piece.
What I'm hearing is that I fell asleep too early. I should have stuck it out.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I like it. And then how they were treated, the other men, while Travis was still missing, way they were treated by the police and under suspicion that they had, killed Travis or something, had done something with him, was very real. Now, maybe there's some little details that they did a little differently. Like, for instance, the movie only has 5 guys instead of 6, and I think that's because that's all that could fit in the cab of that old truck.
Yeah, probably.
But there actually was one more person involved.
Yeah, and they changed the name of Ken Patterson, and I think they changed a couple of things and made composite characters just to facilitate a movie experience, which, I mean, you have to do that when you're making a film.
But I love the movie. Like I said, I've watched it just the other night when Jimmy and I were talking about it, and I was like, "Oh, have you ever seen it?" And I said, "I think it's on Amazon right now." So it is. So listeners, if you want to check out Fire in the Sky, you got Amazon Prime. Fired up. Also on the Internet Movie Database channel. You have to watch a few commercials, but the Travis Walton Experience. What's it called again? The documentary.
The True Story of Travis Walton.
The True Story of Travis Walton. It's very good. One reason I decided or asked Jimmy, I said, "Hey man, do you want to do the Travis Walton thing?" And because I really, really like that. I find him to be just an intelligent, straight shooting type person. I've seen him interviewed many times, and I hope to be able to interview him in person sometime. So the more we grow this podcast, the more likely we'll be able to get some of these guests on our show down the road. So help us do that by rating and reviewing our podcast. Give us 5 stars if you like what you hear, and put a review up. It will help other people find the show, and the more people that listen and download it and find the show, the higher we will go up in the rankings, which will allow even more people to find the show. So for all the people that's already found us, I couldn't believe how many downloads we had on our very first day that we dropped our episodes. And on the very first day, we had just all kinds of downloads, and most in the United States, but a few in Europe. So we can only grow from here. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it, and we love talking about UFOs and other weird wonders of the world with you. Jimmy, you got anything else?
No, I think that's a wrap.
Yeah. So again, if you have an extraordinary experience of some type, please just email the show. Let us know if you want to use an anonymous name or something like that. That's fine. The contact information is firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. And also, if you have any kind of like topic suggestions, we'd be definitely up for that. If we get several that's saying, "Hey, you guys need to look into this case," we'll look into that case. And also, if anything we've talked about on the show, if we have left out some pertinent fact, or we've gotten a fact wrong, if you believe that that is the case, please do not hesitate to let us know. We don't claim to get all the facts exactly right. We try to, but if there's something we miss, something important, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. And be sure and visit our webpage at cosmicsponge.com. We're just getting that off the ground, but reach out to us, just say hello. So not sure what we're going to do next week. We haven't decided that yet, but we'll just leave it at that. Got some ideas. I'll have to talk to Jimmy off air about
Winged humanoids. I just love the sound of that. Winged humanoids.
Winged humanoids. I need to do a lot of research on winged humanoids. So we may do a cryptid next, though, just to prove we're not all about UFOs.
We call them barn owls.
Yeah. This is Steven, and I'm out of here. We'll see you next week.
Later, gang. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.